Good morning and welcome. I have a request before we get started. Can you imagine being on a panel about comedy and being on a panel about comedy from a place called Comedy Central? Like, it's not a requirement that you're funny to work at a place called Comedy Central. Like, that is a lot of pressure. And I feel that pressure on behalf of this panel today. We're going to have a meaty conversation. I'm not funny, which is that I should make that clear. And my name is Jude O'Reilly, and I work at the Skoll Foundation, where I'm responsible for the Skoll Awards and the funding we do within the Skoll portfolio. I'm excited to welcome you to this panel. Funny or not, it's called Not Just for Laughs, How Comedy Sparks Change. In this session, we'll hear from researchers, from comedy writers, and activists. They will share how they leverage humor to drive real and lasting change. A couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. Please silence your cell phones. Ray Suarez has this way of describing this. If your ringtone is a sign of your individuality and personal freedom, please put it on mute for the next 45 minutes. Please wait for the microphone before speaking. There are lots of folks out on the internets that want to hear your question too, and we want to make sure they do. We are filming the session, and that's another thing we want to make sure we preserve. This session is scheduled to end at 11:15. After the session, please take a few seconds to complete a session survey and hand it to your steward on the way out the door. It's what helps us make these panels even better year after year. Delegate-led discussions start at 11:45 a.m. If you're attending a discussion, we recommend that you pick up a to-go lunch and take it with you to the discussion room. There will also be 30 minutes to eat after the discussions end. With that, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Fenella Kernebone, who is head of curation at TEDx Sydney. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. How are we? We're enjoying Skoll. I think it's very good. I'm going to introduce our panelists in just a moment here, but who here is a comedian in the room? Hands up. Okay, no hands. That's okay, cool. Who here works in social change? Great. Who here is a little bit freaked out by trying to incorporate comedy in your work? One. I love the honesty. I think it's great. It's really, really good. So we're going to be talking about this stuff. So no matter where we are in the world, regardless of what it is that we do, what we know and what our panelists are going to be discussing today is the social challenges that we face. Many of these can actually be addressed by really successful use of comedy and comedy writing and teaming up with the right people. It can address things like corruption and racism and extremism and all those sorts of things. So we're going to be unpacking a whole bunch of these things this morning, and again, as Jude kindly mentioned, opening it up to your questions as well. So we'll talk about social change and comedy. Hopefully it'll be a bit funny at times. We're going to have fun. Work at it, all right, yeah. And then we'll try and talk about some of those practical methods, the how-to, like what you can actually do, which I think would be really super important. So without further ado, we won't go into too much detail. I wanted to welcome to the stage three remarkable human beings who are embedded in this. This is their practice. So joining me is comedy writer from Israel, Omri Marcus. Round of applause for Omri. Erika Soto Lamb, who is from Comedy Central. Hello, welcome to you too.
Thank you.
And over there we have Caty Borum, Chattoo, who is the director of the Centre for Media and Social Impact, but most importantly has a book that's coming out in January 2020 on this subject. Can you say the title of the book for me?
A comedian and an activist walk into a bar, most important part. The serious role of comedy in social justice.
Perfect. Welcome to you too.
Thank you.
So a rolling conversation. We're going to be getting through a whole bunch of different things and also playing some clips as well that hopefully are funny too. But Caty, just to start off, I wanted to sort of get a bit of a framework about what we're talking about today. What do we know about how comedy actually works as persuasion, as influence in social issues?
Yeah, so I'll try to set this up somewhat briefly, but the book actually derives out of really about 5 concentrated years of real study and practice around comedy and social justice. So my work spans a lot of different areas, but I come by my comedy pedigree, honestly, because I was a producer for Norman Lear for a long time in Hollywood. He's a legendary comedy producer who sort of was the progenitor of the idea that social issues can be incorporated into comedy in a meaningful way through his shows in the 70s and 80s, and a lot of shows picked up to the mantle, continuing to this day. And so at the center that I run, which is an innovation lab and a research center in Washington, D.C., What we recognized was that I was working on a project that I won't go into detail about. It was actually a documentary about comedy and global development. And we realized in the course of that work that there was so much existing research about comedy and its interrogation of social issues. Comedy as a source of persuasion, also as a source of inspiration for civic practice. However, there were huge gaps in the research. There were questions that were not being addressed. And also, as a strategist and social justice activist myself, the sort of profound realization was that even if any of you, or I'm using you as a surrogate for social change people, social justice leaders, if you wanted to leverage comedy, you might not know what that really meant. How would you do that? How does comedy work as persuasion? How does comedy work as a form of civic engagement and civic practice? So that led to our research, and we wanted to answer a number of questions so that we could actually not just answer the questions, but inspire social justice leaders to actually use comedy. And so I'll just lay out a couple of things that we know from research. So first, we think of, and this is meaningful in a room like this, comedy is adjacent to social justice because social justice, of course, is about seeing the status quo with a new lens and a new way. So comedy is a deviant, disruptive form of art and culture that provides both hope and optimism, a new way to see, brings people in. So it's a source of civic imagination, which is the term that we like to use. And it's also a really important form of social critique. This is particularly important when we have moments of authoritarian regimes, which we'll talk about later. So what we know from research, very briefly, we think about it in two ways, and we'll get into this for the whole panel. There are two levels to think about this. So comedy as a form of persuasion, so what happens to the audience. So I know I probably have behavior change people in the room. So this is sort of your language. But also there's the sociology of how comedy inspires civic practice and why activists may want to use it. So comedy is a source of persuasion. What we know from research, ours and others that we've synthesized in this book and other research projects, are that comedy allows a way into taboo topics. That should be really intuitive. Comedy offers a source of hope and optimism in issues that we have predominantly portrayed as dire and hopeless. We understand that, but there has to be some light and a way in. Turns out from a behavior change perspective, attitude change, hope and optimism are actually motivating emotions. There is also research that shows that comedy is a gateway to serious information. So what that means is that when we acquire serious, complex information about a civic or social issue through comedy, we actually pay closer attention to that issue over time through serious sources of information like journalism. So they're symbiotic in that way. Comedy also works as persuasion through entertainment value and through positive emotions. So what that means—
You mean we laugh?
Yes.
Right.
So that was just and I'll toss it back to the panel. What that really means is that comedy as persuasion doesn't work through entirely a cognitive route, which is one form of persuasion. It works through an affective, emotional route, which is meaningful because what that really means is that if the comedy's not really funny, so if it's loaded down, if it's too messagey, it's actually not working in the way that comedy works as persuasion. So the big advanced piece of information that we'll all talk about is that if social justice leaders and comedians are going to collaborate, there has to be real creative freedom and license given to the comedians. To be entertaining. So that's just a little bit of what we know.
Yeah, a big framework and a background to what it is that we're going to be discussing, and hopefully you'll be able to ask some questions about this as well. Erika, you're at Comedy Central, but you're pretty new to this role.
I am.
So
yeah,
listening
can be misleading.
Make a joke,
and,
just kidding.
A lot of pressure to be funny when you work for a brand like that. The truth is that I come from the social justice and issue advocacy realm. And to Caty's points, we tried comedy on for size and found it really effective. So my background is in politics and in issues, and I was one of the founding team members at an organization called Everytown for Gun Safety and Moms Demand Action, which is one of the largest gun violence prevention organizations in the United States. So heavy issue, hot issue, very political. And we did the things that NGOs and advocacy organizations do. It's actually an organization built out of Mike Bloomberg's City Hall. So data was key, and we did all of the research reports and white papers and polling, and that's all a really important tools in the toolbox of how you get information out, how you educate people. But it doesn't reach everybody. And so I think comedy is a really important part of the culture tool that, if you went to the opening plenary, Ai-jen Poo spoke about Roma and narrative power as a way to bring more people in, to help them understand the issues of domestic workers. And I think that there's so much great film. And comedy is in its nascency.
It's something else in the toolbox that you're able to access.
We did that on guns. We were able to make these complex and frankly screwed up gun laws in the United States, call them out for that through comedy in a way.
Tell me one of those clips, describe something, the one with the mums with guns thing.
Yes.
It's actually a pretty good example of how this might work.
So we actually did exactly what Caty said. We knew that we could, we wanted to leverage comedy to create social change on guns. But we also knew we weren't comedians. So we partnered with a gentleman who's a friend of all of ours. It's a small world, this comedy and social justice mix, named Mick Moore, who has done tons of work in comedy. And he helped us write scripts for what eventually was called What Could Go Wrong. So the Americans might remember, and if you're not American, I apologize, you might be horrified that this was a thing that happened in our country. There's so many of them. There was a trend a few years ago with gun extremists making a point about the right to gun ownership in our country. Second Amendment rights, they have every right to go into the places where we eat and shop, Starbucks, Target, fully strapped. And I'm not talking about, a handgun in a holster. I'm talking about AR-15 assault weapons. So to make a point, they were going to get lattes at Starbucks with fully strapped. And I think it was a wake-up call for us. Moms Demand Action is our grassroots chapter, so we have people all across the country, and they were like, wait, whoa, this isn't, there's responsible gun ownership, and then there's this, and it's a cultural issue. So we used comedy to call it out. We worked with Rachel Dratch, who is a well-known part of the SNL cast, to play the role of a mom who, takes all of these precautions to take care of her children and allergies and don't forget your seatbelt, all the things that parents do to create safety for their children in our environments. And then, the end is they go to what looks like a TGI Fridays, a very family-friendly restaurant. And as they're, putting in orders, making sure about allergies, there's a table of guys who are strapped with assault weapons. And so it just called out into, this really crisp and hilarious way of this is not what we mean by, having respectful gun ownership in our country.
And the punchline was, we'll get our food to go. We should probably leave this restaurant, basically.
And it worked.
It worked.
It wasn't just the comedy piece. It also helped us bring people in to sign the petition to tell corporate leaders. A lot of what we did was, call your legislators. This was, tell the corporations where you spend your money that this isn't what you want to encounter. And in fact, Howard Schultz, the CEOs of Chipotle and Target, they did make policy changes and statements saying this is not the environment that we want for our consumers.
We want to do something about it. Omri, let's meet you and what it is that you do, because it's a bit different. You're a comedy writer, you're based in Israel, but you also put on a conference that, actually a little bit about what Erika was saying, it's about having the right partners, so literally getting people in a room to collaborate. Tell me a bit about how that works for you.
Well, my background is comedy writing, and after that I got a scholarship to travel the world and learn television all around the world for a year. So I created a big network of comedy writers and comedy professionals and content people in general, because we are all storytellers eventually. And in 2014, I had this dream to bring the best comedy writers in the world to Jerusalem, the funniest place on earth. Said no one ever. And it was an amazing experience, because we sat around a table, 15 writers, leading writers from 15 countries, and we wrote a sketch together. And it was very powerful, and it was mind-blowing with all the insights that we got. And since then, we're pretty much once a year meeting. Usually it's a different group of people every year. And a few months ago, actually, 2 months ago, Caty and I were in South by doing a panel about Donald Trump impersonators from around the world. And actually, as a treat, we actually have the opening clip from that.
Okay, yeah, so there is something about the moment that does lend itself to comedy and Donald Trump impersonators. So we do have a clip of, as Omri said, of Donald Trump impersonators, which we'll have a look at.
I think it's 15 Trumps in 1 minute.
Yes. Yeah, Donald Trump, избранный президент Соединенных Штатов Америки.
No one loves Ireland more than me, with your bagpipes and your haggis puddings. Yum, 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 yum.
First of all, I want to say I love Africa. I do.
We had the best cake. It was so moist. So moist.
These are medieval times. So what we need is a medieval president.
Vladimir Putinia, mä en edes tiedä, miltä hän näyttää.
But at the end of my sentences, I'm just gonna clench my mouth.
This is true. They elected a feminist government.
Wrong. People of Israel, happy Independence Day from your good friend, America.
I tell you what, the media is hugely corrupt, but we've got huge problems. Seriously, big problems.
Mr. Putin, по-английски нам споет.
Who are you? 那么快保护人可是谁呢？岳山茶法，我说好就是好。
Gegenfrage.
Ja.
And may God bless the United States of Trump. Thank you.
There you go. What was with the grey hair, the grey wig? I'm confused about that one.
You know, I had to call, when I called him and I needed a translator, and I asked him, why is that with the grey wig? And he's like, isn't it grey? I was like, no. Oh, do we all look the same to you? Okay. No, fine.
Could we talk more broadly about what it is about the moment that is enabling comedians, comedy writers, and also those working in social entrepreneurship, social change, social justice to meet at the moment to start talking about these issues? I mean, and the Trump clip is a good way of kind of leading into that. Caty, what is it about now that is allowing this sort of next level of communication to start to be more prevalent?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Fenella.
Thank you so much.
I appreciated that a lot. We all hung out yesterday, so this would feel natural. Also, we like each other, it turns out. Well, yes, it's a really important question, and so I won't go into a deep history, but there was a moment in comedy in the United States that actually felt very similar to this one in the 1960s. And this is important for a couple of different reasons. A, the media landscape had just changed dramatically. It was the infancy years of television, and producers were looking for what was going to stick on TV. It turns out comedy was pretty hot. There was always alternative comedy in clubs and records. That's where the socially conscious comedy started to come up. And at the same time, we had social justice activism. So those ideas came together, filling a new media marketplace, and activism came together. So we're witnessing and are in the midst of, as you all know, a moment that is transformative in a different way, but has a lot of parallels. And so this particular moment is not, does not occur in a cultural vacuum. It's actually incredibly important to acknowledge that what we're in, of course, is the participatory networked era, where access to making comedy is opened up and democratized in ways that are pretty dramatic. So as a quick example, a lot of the comedians that I write about in my book are comedians who are now winning big awards and are on big mainstream shows like Hasan Minhaj, who's created the Patriot Act, which just was nominated for a Peabody Award 2 days ago. Hasan Minhaj is a YouTube-created comedian, and this is really important. He is a person of color in the United States talking about an immigrant experience and what his life is like. So at the same time, we have these new voices. The marketplace in entertainment and in comedy is changing and shifting and opening up for marginalized voices who weren't previously there, because Hollywood does understand a market when it sees one. The other thing, of course, is that we know that activism has changed. So when we think about comedy at this moment, it's not just comedy in the marketplace, it's also short form comedy, like the kind of work Erika just talked about, that was created for activists. And we have a lot of examples that we write about and talk about, where that work is self-produced by professional comedy people. So for both of those things to be true is really relevant, and that's different than this conversation even would have been 6 years ago, actually. We're really talking about something fresh. And the one thing that I'll say, just as sort of the commercial for use comedy, which is that young activists, we've noticed, organically understand that comedy and culture is part of what they should be using, because they are digital natives in that way, and they're also digital entertainment natives in a different kind of way than those of us who are Gen X and older. So this is important to keep in mind, because comedy, what led to all of our work and my friendship and collaboration with these guys, is a recognition that the social justice community was dramatically underutilizing comedy. And it's a really strategic tool.
So how, let's just unpack that a bit. How is the social justice community actually dramatically underusing comedy? Erika, what's your perspective, and Omri as well? Let's try and understand what's actually happening at the core.
Yeah, I would also say that comedy has too often just been about the punchline, and not gone further into the education and engagement that can equip the audience into creating change. Now, I'm not advocating that this be, you beat people over the head and we turn Comedy Central into a social justice network, or that it'll feel like an after-school special. I think it needs to be really strategic and thoughtful. But that the comedy is a medium to get people to see the absurdity of the social problems that we are living through. Actually, I think now would be a good time to cue the second video, which is Amy Schumer, who's a well-known comedian and who just takes on so many issues. This one covers a couple, but you have to watch till the end to see how she covers it more than one.
You live a busy life. The last thing you want to have to worry about is your birth control pill. That's why we're introducing Orthoestrin, a new low-dose daily birth control pill with little to no side effects. Ask your doctor if birth control is right for you. Then ask your boss if birth control is right for you. Ask your boss to ask his priest. Find a Boy Scout and see what he thinks. Tap a mailman on the shoulder.
Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you.
Tell him you didn't mean to startle him. Then ask him if birth control is right for you. Put it online and see how many likes it gets.
Come on.
Ask an old black man and an Asian boy playing chess in the park.
Can I start this new birth control?
Then ask them how they became friends, because there has just gotta be a story there.
I'm trying to get birth control, and I was
Ask
told
someone who just got one of those cochlear implants and is hearing for the very first time.
Yeah, but can I get birth control?
Ask Jeeves.
I'm supposed to ask you too.
Ask your mom's new boyfriend. Then ask the Supreme Court. Finally, ask yourself why you insist on having sex for fun.
Wait, no refills? I have to go through all this again next month?
Yep. See you then.
Can I have a gun?
Yep. Remember, that's your right.
So good, right? Like, so powerful to help us see the hoops that we have to jump through in women's reproductive rights, and yet, you want a gun? Here you go. And so she, in I think that was a minute, really powerfully expressed on two really important social issues in the United States. What's profoundly wrong. And so, that's such a great entry point for somebody who worked in gun safety, who also has an interest in reproductive rights, that we can use, that we can leverage. And so she did that on her own. Later, a couple of years later, there was an unfortunate shooting at the premiere of Amy's movie, Trainwrecked. And so she became an even more forceful advocate for using comedy. She had a sketch show on, and she devoted one of the episodes in the series entirely to gun safety. And so there are a dozen great sketch comedy clips from her that all led people into taking action to create the country that we want.
It's also interesting because Comedy Central is it's a big network, and as sort of following on from what Caty was saying, it's at that moment when all of these other voices have had access, or they're providing themselves access through different types of technology. So, can you talk a bit about how Comedy Central and other places, and Omri, please pipe in here too, are actually going, this is the moment where we need to start thinking and looking outside of the box a little bit, and that's actually changing the way that these platforms are working themselves.
Right, so I'm in a new role. I've been there for about 6 months. Comedy Central has never employed somebody from the social justice world before to figure out how to accelerate the possibility of using comedy for social change. And one of the things that I'm really excited about, and I'm working in partnership with Caty and Mick Moore, who I mentioned earlier, it's called the Yes and Laughter Lab, which is
YAL,
also known as YAL.
I like saying that. YAL.
Good acronym. And what it is a first-time convening and collaboration between funny people and social justice people. That's not to say that they are mutually exclusive, because you can be funny and care about social issues, and you can care about social issues and have a really great sense of humor, but that we hadn't had a room and a space yet to pull people together and figure out, how do we make this work? How do we do more of what Amy Schumer does on her own and so many other comedians do on their own? And so we essentially have done a call for applications. This is the first year. It's a bit of a test case. And you never know what's going to work. You asked earlier, why now? Well, why not now?
Yeah.
Let's throw everything on the wall and see what sticks. And early in the process, we thought, Caty can attest to this, we're like, we really want to get 100 applications in.
50.
Yeah, we wanted to get a good number so we could pick. We're going to pick 5 to come into a room that will be filled with philanthropists and NGOs and comedy brands to hear the pitch and then figure out, how do we make some of those things happen.
So there's basically a thirst for this to happen.
So the end is that there were 500.
Yeah.
Way more than we expected. So there's energy there that just needs to be harnessed and pulled into creating social change across all of the issues.
So there needs to be the space to open it up for collaboration. Omri, tell me a little bit about what your observations about. You work in the comedy world. You're a writer. This is what you do.
My day job is not related. I'm working for this company that is doing game shows in India. But basically, what we are doing, but it is a part of that, because we are all storytellers, as said, and the technology is making the best opportunity that we were ever facing to do a comedy on a huge scale with very limited resources. So I can give you an example. Right after the American elections and for Brexit, we were all very depressed. Our community was very depressed. So we decided to meet in London, and we locked ourselves in a room for 72 hours. 15 writers from 15 countries, and an app developer and an app designer. Now, it's an intimate forum, so I can feel free to tell you what we've done there, but let's keep it here. We created an app called Pure DNA Test, which is the first app that, using the sensor of your smartphone, that by licking the screen, we can tell you your genealogical heritage. So people lick the screen, you can download it if you have an Android device, lick the screen, and then it says calculating, and then, like the rest of the world, you're also from Africa, you phone-licking idiot. Yeah. And the front camera was working, so you got a clip of yourself licking the screen like an idiot. Now, we only distributed that app where Donald Trump won by a big margin, so I can tell you that we made 10,000 racist Americans to lick their smartphones, which I think made my point. So in this triangle of technology, comedy, and bringing people together, there is a lot of power. And this is kind of like we are advocating for you to start using
to start
that power.
doing it as well. So what are the sort of the stopping blocks, Caty? That are, I mean, you know, not everybody's going to get together and get people to lick Screenz, for example. Although we can all try.
This is one of my favorite stories. I mean, I've been on several panels together. So you too could have a phone licking project. That's what you should take away from this panel. Well, one thing, before I answer that really quickly, Fenella, I wanted to add the yes and laughter lap, y'all, which makes us laugh when we have internal calls, like, hey, y'all. It never really gets that old. It does. Sometimes it gets a little old. But
it's chuckles.
Yeah, it's chuckles. We're amused by it.
Yep.
One other point that I want to raise here is that we didn't create that project just because we thought it was a good idea. It actually came from research that what we were observing was that even if we had all this evidence for how comedy works as persuasion or informs civic practice, inspires civic practice, et cetera, these are two different sectors. You all know when you work across sectors, the organizational norms between you can often be the barrier for actually doing the work in a meaningful way. It's like this when we do storytelling work. And so we thought we can't just have a convening where we tell people how this is a good idea. We're going to make them work together. So it's a little bit like the Good Pitch Project. If Jess Search is in the room, she's such a genius, created that project with Doc Society. It's a little bit similar to that idea. And the other thing that I think is important for this kind of group to know is that our other big observation is that, you know, comedy is a form of art and creativity and culture. We think of it as a form of commerce, but actually it's a form, it's very self-made. It comes from passion. It comes from people who get the courage to often start on stage. Everybody starts as an amateur. Almost never, you know, I mean, some people go get MFAs in screenwriting or whatever, but, and however, we have philanthropic sources of funding for almost every form of arts in the United States. It's still, you know, we need it for visual arts, for documentary, for music, but we don't, largely speaking, have philanthropic sources of funding for comedy. And yet, again, strategic, important, artistic. So the only pipeline at the moment, generally speaking, to really create comedy that has a chance of succeeding in the marketplace is to depend on market forces. Now, if we believe in comedy in the social justice community, the philanthropic community, foundations and others, should pay attention to that because it's a form of art.
But and you know that it works, like you were talking about this towards the start, the power of persuasion.
We fund documentaries because they're super effective.
That's right, but exactly, and the way that comedy is actually able to reach people and to get attention, and in particular those that are actually only getting their sources of news from the late night TV shows in America, for example, or in Australia, it's kind of pretty similar. You might, you know, my niece, who's 19 years old, gets her news from Snapchat and comedy sources as well. So there's a market there that you need to be able to address at the moment, and a level of distrust towards the, you know, the traditional news corporations as well. So how do we get around that? Is it just simply about trying to get people in social change to find better funders for it? What's the solutions, do you think, Erika?
Well, I should have said I'm a sponsor of an idea that Caty and Mick had, right?
You could say whatever you want.
Getting to see that there's an evolution that needs to happen in both the comedy world and the social justice world. And I'm lucky that I'm in the mix of the nexus of the two. But that evolution from critique to change is what I'm really hoping to fuel within the new space that I'm in, to say, yes, we can be funny and we can change the world. And on the social justice side, you can say, yes, you can change the world and you can be funny. And so, you know, yes and, which if you've ever done improv, that's one of the mechanisms for keeping the conversation going and continuing to be hilarious. But I think it's a really relevant way to show people that you can do both at the same time in a really effective way. And I think documentary films, feature films, those are also really powerful tools, but you know, you need the attention span for that as well. And the thing about this convergence of media and how everything is being disrupted, and your niece getting her information from Snapchat, is that I think the appetite for content is shortening and coming in sound in bits. It's snackable media, and that comedy is primed and perfect for that. So I'm excited to see more of that.
Do you agree, Omri?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. Reality, in this kind of chaotic reality that we are all living in, I think comedy is breaking this chaotic reality to edible chunks so you can digest, and it's a very powerful tool. I can say from a personal perspective, I'm not sure, I guess you all heard we had elections on Tuesday. This is why I got here late, because I had to vote. I was the first in line, I voted. And when the plane landed and I saw the devastating results, I couldn't ask for a better audience to kind of like to be around, because I needed this kind of engagement and hope. But
and maybe a cuddle, do you think?
From time to time, yeah. But I think that comedy will be a good tool for us to explain our message, our non-extremist, non-racist message to the audience. It will be much more powerful. And this is kind of like my last hope, that we'll have to win ever elections. So comedy is a very powerful tool for that.
But not all comedians, I mean, obviously this is pretty basic stuff here, but not all comedians see social change as something that they need to think about. And obviously not all social change entrepreneurs, for example, are looking in the same way as well. So we talked a little bit about collaboration, but how do you get those two to catch and hang out together and to start to think differently? Caty, what do you think?
I think it's a little bit of, so I don't want to hang it completely on this idea of organizational norms and how sectors work differently, but that actually is really important. So I spoke here 4 years ago when the fire happened. Is anybody else in that? Right? It's very memorable. And I was speaking about comedy then, actually. And so I've been, as the work has developed and we've created creative initiatives, and there's a book coming out that came from all of that, I would give sort of variations of a talk like this, where I'm like obviously a very enthusiastic supporter of this idea, and I would give, in a different kind of talk. I'm more of a professor. I'm trying not to do that to you this morning. It's way too early. But I would give a lecture and explain, like, here, comedy and persuasion, show you experimental design research and storytelling genres and whatever. But then inevitably there would be a question at the end, like, but comedy can go too far. I was like, oh my God, we have to move past that. I'm not saying that comedy works for every issue. Of course it doesn't. There is cultural competency. There are issues about the cultural sensitivity about particular forms of comedy, what's funny, what's not. All of that is true. But to your question, Fenella, it was just a really profound recognition. I guess this is also a little bit meta. I cannot persuade these people alone. Let's create, the lab came from this and other creative projects. Let's create spaces where we actually can work together creatively. And actually, the creative process in comedy, by the way, is really different. I've been working in arts and culture most of my career, and produced documentaries, and it's like when you work with comedy writers, it's a whole different thing. There's like a space issue. There's you have to lock yourselves in a room for 2 days. There's pizza boxes. I know I'm making you an archetype, just like you do.
How much pizza? Sorry.
Yeah, right.
But no women allowed.
No, right. That's also So anyway, I could be very long-winded, and I already have been. But to say that. We think there's a lot of promise in bringing sectors together to collaborate. And I want to say here, even though I said somewhat dramatically to be provocative, because it's early in the morning, somewhat provocative, I said it's underutilized. But for the groups that are using comedy, it's quite amazing. We write about them. I think Ai-jen Poo, the amazing social justice leader who you all heard in the opening plenary, she's profiled in our book because she's using comedy for kind of training, spokesperson training. I'm grossly streamlining that. So there are a lot of examples, and I think that as we highlight examples and as we have more of them, and hopefully with our lab, which also we're hoping to take around the world, so Omri will someday be a partner in it.
What about me? I'm just kidding.
And you, Fenella, for sure you. That just happened. We hope there are just more examples. We need more projects to support and to study and to show real things happening with, because this will become a generative story.
And we'll have more case studies of how it works.
Well, can we actually try and work out how it works?
Yeah,
and get some understanding
the case study of knowing that something ludicrous was happening on an issue and creating content that then drove people to us. Another example from I'm putting on my different hats from the different work that I've done, but working in the gun violence prevention space. So I should say that the organization I worked for was tiny before the Sandy Hook shooting. It didn't exist. And it was, probably a dozen people. It was more of a think tank, PAC, research entity. But when the Sandy Hook shooting happened, we realized that was a moment to build something new and really create a movement of Americans who will say they've had enough and it's time to demand that our leaders take action on this problem. Sandy Hook happened on a Friday morning, and I was working for Mike Bloomberg, and the phones just started ringing from funders, from Hollywood. What can we do? And one of my colleagues had the genius idea to just rent a soundstage, one in New York and one in LA, write a script. And we were able to, within a week, the next Friday, we released a PSA that the space was probably donated. We didn't spend a penny on having it viewed, but Beyonce was in it. Like think of your favorite Hollywood actor, they were probably in it. And that helped to fuel bringing people in. Now, it wasn't particularly funny, but there were comedians in it, Tina Fey, Amy Poehler. Just using the power of culture is how we were able to start a conversation and really build a movement around an issue. And I think that's something that I want to help do over and over again on many issues and where this is all coming from.
And Omri, it's the other thing, of course, is knowing what you want to do. Like, you want to know what your audience is, the kind of comedy that you want to produce. Like, you even did a bit of a how-to guide to what comedy could be. Can anybody be a comedian if you're in social change?
Well, the basic part is a craft, and you can kind of learn it, but it's basically you need the desire to do so and the collaboration with people that it's actually the work is the right way of doing that, which leads us to the question when comedy is going too far, and then Caty will show a great explanation, a great example of when that happened. And the only two examples I have from my work, I can't tell that on stage because I can't put that on record because it's illegal in some countries, but I did use technology to do a really nasty trolling to the other side.
Okay.
It's very funny.
You roasted someone quite well.
Find me at the bar in the middle of the night. I might be drunk enough to tell you.
He'll lick his phone too.
Well, yeah. It's true. There are a lot of people worry that you can go too far. But the question is, you need to understand what the question is that you're asking in the first place and who you want to talk to. So maybe this is a good opportunity to play this next clip, and then we're going to open up to some of your questions as well. But this clip, actually, Caty, I'll let you introduce it. Tell me about this clip.
Sure, yeah. So I thought this was a really meaningful example of a couple of different ideas. So far we've been talking about hope and optimism and ways to bring people together, and that's true. But comedy also is a source of social critique, as we know, and sometimes comedians can do things with social critique that often journalists can't do. So actually that's really important to honor that piece of it.
Or won't do, actually.
Or won't do, for whatever reason. But so I guess the setup for this is last year in the United States we have this event called the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And at the White House Correspondents' Dinner for many, many, many decades, I think 60 years or something, there's been a comedian who's been invited to be the sort of entertainer. And the comedian's job is to make fun of the room, make fun of the president, Congress, the press, whatever. So Michelle Wolf, and by the way, it's very infrequently been women, only a couple times, like Wanda Sykes, some other women, but largely has been men. So a comedian named Michelle Wolf was the comedian, and she used some language, and she said things, but she said this piece at the end, and this is what we're going to show you all, where she calls out the press for their complicity in Trump. Now, the press, many of us have been following this for a while. This is now an open source of discussion a year and a half later, and is a really important one. But she did it in a way, she was slightly ahead of time. And the way that the White House press corps attacked her, and didn't ever mention that clip, but said things like, she was mean to the press secretary. That was not the point of her comedy. So we're gonna show that piece just the last minute, and then we can talk about that a little bit. And really, this is about comedy informs, and by the way, Donald Trump attacked her in the same way that reporters attacked her. So that's meaningful.
Okay, let's have a look at the clip.
There's a ton of news right now. A lot is going on, and we have all these 24-hour news networks. And we could be covering everything. But instead, we're covering like 3 topics. Every hour, it's Trump, Russia, Hillary, and a panel of 4 people that remind you why you don't go home for Thanksgiving. Milk comes from nuts now, all because of the gays. You guys are obsessed with Trump. Did you used to date him? Because you pretend like you hate him, but I think you love him. I think what no one in this room wants to admit is that Trump has helped all of you. He couldn't sell steaks or vodka or water or college or ties or Eric. But he has helped you. He's helped you sell your papers and your books and your TV. You helped create this monster, and now you're profiting off of him. And if you're gonna profit off of Trump, you should at least give him some money because he doesn't have any. Trump is so broke, he grabs pussies because he thinks there might be loose change in them. All right, like an immigrant who was brought here by his parents and didn't do anything wrong. I gotta get the fuck out of here. Good night. Flint still doesn't have clean water.
The point here is saying, I mean, look, I think Michelle Wolf is really talented, and I wrote a piece the next day for a trade publication and said, you know, what we're getting wrong about this narrative about attacking her is that she actually said some of the most important things that we need to be saying, which is, how are we reporting on this guy? And, you know, in times of oppression, and moments of authoritarian, you know, whatever language we want to use, including in the United States, this is when we really need comedy to speak truth to power, not just against the other. She set the media agenda for 2 weeks based on that.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a resonance, of course, it's an American-based thing, but it's a resonance for all of us around the world, from Australia to anywhere. So I think it's a great point to understand it. So now it's time for you to pick their brains for their expertise and to ask some questions. So we're going to roam around with some microphones. Please wait for the microphone, and we'll just keep this conversation going. So we'll start down here. Thank you so much.
Hi. Is this on? No, not yet.
Not just yet. Keep talking.
Is it on now?
Yes.
Yes. Hi. So I'm Barbara Van Dalen. I'm the president and founder of Give an Hour, and our focus is mental health. And also, this is a question about sort of different ways to use comedy and what you've experienced. And in addition to running the organization, I also have the great honor to be a consultant on an ABC television show called A Million Little Things. What's so interesting about that show is that it's tackling the ramifications, the ripple effects of suicide. And the writer who wrote the show, who's the creator, is a comedy writer. And that's what he did, DJ Nash. For years, he started stand-up. And then he experienced a suicide in his life, which is what led him to create the show. So in the show, the comedy is not around the suicide, ever. And so you have these really powerful emotional moments that are real and authentic, which is why they brought in a mental health person. But he's funny, and the characters are really funny. And what we're finding is that the fans, it makes it more easy for them to open up, to share about their own experiences online. He's funny online. You see the back and forth. And I'd like you just to comment on this continuum of how comedy in this way, it wouldn't be appropriate for the comedy to be about the tragedy, but around the characters,
peripheral.
it's
Yeah.
incredibly
Yeah.
powerful and helpful.
I think Caty said it great. You said comedy is the gateway. We'll say comedy is the gateway drug, right? To get people in the door. And Barbara, you've called out a show that is really powerful and has found its ways to be funny around a serious and difficult topic. But I think that there can be more comedy also in the context of teaching people how to recognize the signs and symptoms, creating the culture change around emotional health so that we treat it in the same way that we treat physical health. And so, comedy is another one of those tools to leverage in the context of creating culture change. Like I don't sit in a role that is actually social change, social justice in an organization, but I sort of view myself, and I hope that there will be many more of me, as like the in-house activist, the in-house voice for social change that can take us from creating culture change to political and thought change that really changes policies and how we live and how we address issues like suicide.
Well, can I add to that really quickly? So you raised something really important, and I'll just add in here a little bit of nerdy business. It's important that we also keep in mind, and this is for like media researchers for us to keep in mind and to incorporate this into our work, that comedy is not a monolithic genre. And so comedy is not all satirical news, of course. Comedy is stand-up. Comedy is episodic television, which is what you're talking about. It's short form. It's also sketch comedy. And so that's really meaningful because I think sometimes there's a tendency to think like, oh, it's all The Daily Show. Definitely not, and that's not the only thing we're talking about. So you raised something really important, which is that in episodic television, not just in comedy, we develop relationships with media characters that feel like real interactions to us, parasocial relationships. They feel like our real friends. So in episodic comedy, this is actually a really meaningful effect, which is that it humanizes issues and people who are portrayed as the other in other forms of information and journalism. And suicide is a very stigmatized issue, and it's hard to talk about, and it's hard to, address with people around you. And so there is research that shows that as well. So I think you're using it really well. You didn't even read the book.
Thank you. So we'll get your question. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, my name is Connor DiManioman, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Philanthropy University. I also am a co-lecturer at Stanford Business School on a course called Humor, Serious Business.
Ooh.
And so I want to be friends with all of you and talk with you and get your cards and hear about that crazy story where you offended some dictator or whatever.
At the bar.
11 o'clock tonight.
The pub.
In a dark corner.
So one of the things we talk about in the Stanford course is activating your funny, in particular for people who don't themselves consider themselves to be funny. So I'm wondering, do you have any practical advice for people who don't think they're funny, for where they can start in using humor and using levity to activate social change, or even activate change in their relationships or their organizations?
Was a couple of different
Omri, would you like to tackle that one?
Wow, that's a tough one. I would steal materials from other comedians that actually know how to do that.
I do it all the time.
We're all doing that. No, I'm joking.
I agree.
But I just want to add to what your comments from before, that if to quote another famous person, I feel like it's the spoonful of sugar that makes the medicine go down. That kind of using comedy to use those, mental health is such a taboo, and to use comedy to break it into the tiny elements that build that fear out of that topic and make it kind of like go away, because it's kind of like to understand there is some more complicated elements there and some funny light moments that we kind of like will be the gateway to understanding that would make a big evolution in the acceptance of the society to that.
And to answer the question, I would say knowing your role, like knowing what, we always know your audience. If you're going to give a speech, if you're going to put out a report, who are you really trying to reach? I think you have to know your audience, but you also have to know your role and your strength. And so I think one of the things that I want to do now in the inside of a comedy brand is I now work with a lot of hilarious people who know how to translate issues in comedic ways, but they don't go deep. It's not their job to know the ins and outs. So I want to develop really strong partnerships because that was who I used to be, who I still am in my heart and core, to brief us. Like, let us develop a really strong partnership with the universe of organizations that are working on a certain issue, so we can get really smart. Because I also think that the comedian side shouldn't just be writing. What is the goal of the activists, of the organizations who are doing the work, so that we can start to create the comedy that drives towards the same endpoint.
But to that point, it's also, I always say, if you're not a comedian, don't try and be one. If you're going to, you don't want to be like your granddad trying to make a joke at the beginning of a speech at someone's wedding. It's never going to work. And we all know what that's like. But you were sort of saying, how do you bring that into your own life? It's really, I always say, it's just about being open. You talked about partnerships. Those collaborations that you make with people who are funny are going to be vital no matter what it is that you do.
Well, there's also just to add to that, I'm sure you know this because you teach about this topic, so I'm excited to meet you. But there's improv training, of course, which is about how we become funny in our personal selves, but also if you're funny already. So that's one thing. But the other thing, just to add to what Fenella said and to add to what my colleagues have also said, I have this term. I was trying to explain this in a very wonky way from a research perspective. I was like, everybody's eyes are glazing over. So now I just say, what we shouldn't be doing is creating what I call conference room comedy. So conference room comedy, we've all been in this meeting. We're sitting around the conference room and someone goes, what's our new public engagement strategy gonna be? And then someone's like, oh, hey, Fenella's pretty funny. She could write the comedy thing. And then Fenella, eager to please, says, sure, I'll write the comedy thing. But what we know is that Fenella, while multi-talented, is not a comedy writer. Do not let her do it. So this is about collaboration. So collaborating with comedians is important. So I said this in a podcast interview with an amazing scholar named Henry Jenkins, who created this term civic imagination or whatever. And he's real smart and funny. So I was saying the conference, this is just a joke because it makes me laugh every time. So I said, so Henry, we shouldn't be creating conference room comedy. And he goes, oh, so what you're saying is a combination of mansplaining and bad dad jokes is not going to equal social change.
Oh, because I was about to tell you a joke and it was going to be a bad dad joke. Okay, we want to get through a few more questions, so we'll try and do quicker answers. Is that okay?
I just want to finish that.
That failed.
One last explanation. No, I want to say, we've been to a lot of panels about comedy, trying to dissecting the frog and explaining comedy. And I was never surrounded by 75% female. And I got to say, it's not easy to be a minority.
It's just so hard, I know.
Kudos to the so-called people.
So hands up if you have questions, and I want to get through these things really quickly. So let's all try and do quick answers too. So you, sir, and then we'll move over to that. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Mark Silver from NPR. Caty, I wanted to interview you in 2015 and I didn't, but now I will when I get back. I had two questions. I edited a blog on global health and development called Goats and Soda. And I know, Erika, you said it's not always about the punchlines. It would be really cool to share some punchlines that work. Do you each have an example of a joke about a social problem, a knock-knock joke, a riddle, anything that would make people laugh?
Oh my God.
And you can think about that for a second. My other question is, as a consumer of comedy, I go home, I watch Seth Meyers, I watch The Daily Show, I watch Stephen Colbert, and I'm so depressed at the end because it breaks that chaotic reality into edible chunks, and I'm like, it's worse than I imagined because I didn't know Donald Trump can't even pronounce the word oranges or origin. So how do you guard against that being swamped by so much political comedy that it ends up depressing you?
Wow. I don't have a joke prepared. Again, knowing my role, I'm not a comedian, but I'll work on it. I'll go talk to my friends who are, and we'll come back with a really great retort.
No, I can tell you that I do have one liner of Stephen Wright that it always keeps with me. It says that the banks want you to trust them with all your money, but they are tying the pen to the table when you are getting to see them. I don't remember the exact, but it is a punchline, 12 words. The first 10 build you to one direction. The last two are kind of like breaking it, but it's kind of like tells you the whole story about your relationship with the economical system. And you kind of like, for a second, you rethink all this relationship, and it's much more complicated topic that explained to you in one clear, blunt way. So that's kind of an explanation.
I want to acknowledge, though, that it is heavy. And from a comedy brand side, we actually are planning a new show to come after The Daily Show that will be intended to be a palate cleanser. Because we heard that. We listened to our audience, and we know that you want to see the issues being astutely criticized and made hilarious, but you might need something before you go to bed. That said, a lot of people are watching.
Yeah.
They're watching the clips.
I have one punchline. We haven't got time to play it, but George Pell was Cardinal George Pell in Australia, and he you may know, was convicted and jailed a couple of weeks ago for assaulting children, basically. But Tim Minchin, who's a musician, a music comedian, another Australian comedian, basically did a song 3 years ago that went viral and it hit the charts. It was called Come Home Pell, and the punchline was he had to come home, he had to face the courts, and now he's in jail. So thank you very much.
No, it was actually, it's an amazing story. It shows you how can comedy generate change. Tim Minchin is a stand-up comedian that is known for those songs that he is doing. And you should check out the song that he wrote about this person, Cardinal Pell, that generates such a big...
it's massive.
Yeah, that it's actually almost won the Australian music chart for that year. So the joke...
Yeah, he's a hero in Australia. No, Tim Minchin, sorry. Yeah, to be clear. We'll go to your question, thank you.
Hi, I'm Eli. I'm a student here at Oxford. I really love the Stephen Colbert quote that reality has a well-known liberal bias. And which I think is kind of true, but what I think is interesting is, comedy is a tool that anyone can use. So obviously, my Trump voting uncle is listening to something and he's laughing about it. So I think we might be kind of sequestered in a world in which we're only seeing a certain brand of comedy. So that's one thing that I think is interesting to discuss. The other thing is, how would we think about using comedy to reach people that are from a totally different political or social perspective? Maybe some good examples you have of that, because I think there's obviously two sides to the politicization of comedy. It can be a good thing when you see someone like Michelle Wolf give an amazing rendition, but it can also have repercussions.
Ooh, can I start on that really quick? I promise I won't make it long.
No.
So yes, it's a really, really smart and important question. So again, I'll go back to this idea that what you're asking is a genre question, which I think is really important. So there is some evidence that when we're talking about issues that are sort of, I call ideologically hijacked in some way, like strong polar opposition on one side or the other, that satire is not used at that moment to get people who are on the other side to come with you, right? That's not what satire is, a biting form of social critique. But satire is used in that sense to mobilize a base, to coalesce identity around issues that you think about. But what kinds of comedy, this is why it's so important for the work that we're doing together and we'll do together and that we write about in this book, is that it is to not stop at political satire, because that's a very limited story. And actually, we already know it. There's like a whole lot of research about it, which you probably know because you're a student at Oxford. I feel like you know everything if you go to Oxford. But the kind of comedy, here's a really good example that's been written about a number of times by people in the culture change community, and also there's some social science research around shows that portrayed gay and lesbian characters in the 90s into the early 2000s, all the way up to Modern Family and Glee, all the way up to the constitutional right to marry in 2015. And that's a perfect example of that, right? So I hate to say humanize, it's so offensive, we have to humanize gay and lesbian people, but those shows did that, and they reached, and if you look at a show like Modern Family is a big network ABC Disney show. That is not just for one part of America. Those characters were beloved. So by the time they got married, America embraced that. That's a long, steady, we don't have enough time to get into the sort of long and short game of social change and strategy and all of that, but that's a long, steady ebb and flow of humanity and kindness and light and optimism that's not at all the same thing as political satire.
And actually, you can see in America, most of the social evolutions are being reflected few years before they happened in comedy. Mary Tyler Moore show, or the Bill Cosby, the first one, the first round of Bill Cosby, and all the, so we're talking about Afro-Americans, female, gay and lesbian.
An intersection of marginalized people.
Another questions? Oh, just down here, thank you. And then one at the back after that. And you, yes.
Hi, I'm James Logan. I'm from the Fund for Global Human Rights, and we are working with activists around the world to integrate comedy in different countries. And so I'm really interested in that. I know you are exploring some of the same things. And
with your colleague?
With my colleague, who's also called James. James, but and you know, in some countries, for example, there is not a tradition of stand-up comedy. There are, you know, very different cultural approaches to how comedy is used. And actually, I just wanted to pick up on that last point about Bill Cosby, where I think about comedy being used to sort of advance the rights of particular communities, but then on other issues, that same comedian can be really, really retrograde and really punching down.
Right.
And so I think of like Dave Chappelle, for example, you know, who's been so interesting in the States about calling out like issues around racism and racial discrimination, but then when he came back 2 or 3 years ago, the way he was talking about trans people was just appalling. So creative freedom, but how do you deal with that kind of issue?
Yeah.
Caty?
Well, you're right to point that out as well. So this is not a complete answer to that, but, and I know Omri will have a real perspective on this as a comedy writer, but most comedy is funny when it punches up, not down, so we know that, but then yes, there are the kinds of issues that you spoke about. But so the incomplete answer, but I think it's really important to acknowledge, is that because the marketplace is shifting so much, the marketplace is changing this dynamic a lot, right? So I use Hasan Minhaj as an example a lot. I produced a documentary about him 4 years ago before he was on The Daily Show, and so I've followed his work very closely. Hasan is such a great example of what I mean by the marketplace is shifting around truly embracing voices that have been traditionally marginalized to squeeze out that other stuff. So Hasan, if you all watch Patriot Act on Netflix, I've now promoted it twice. You know, I asked Hasan for my book. I interviewed all these comedy people and justice leaders and whatever, and I said, so how are you coming up with your topics? And if you know what he's doing, you know, he's a lot of justice topics. And he said something to the effect of, look, if you're a white comedy person, if you, Caty, did a story on affirmative action, no matter how you do that story and no matter how much you're well-meaning, it's going to sound like a book report because you don't really know, and I don't. But he said, but I'm a brown man in America. I'm going to do a story about affirmative action that's going to feel and look totally different. So that is cultural citizenship. That is a full embracing, not assimilating into some version that's palatable in a sort of marketplace that's dominated by particular gatekeepers. And he's not the only one. So I think that that there is a calling out of the comedy that you're talking about, like that, even within the last 5 years. And so I think that is starting to happen in ways that are kind of organic, but not entirely organic because the media landscape has shifted so much.
Excellent. There's a question here, thank you, and then there afterwards.
Thanks. My name is Tara Lloyd. I lead an organization in Madagascar called Pivot. And I just wanted to build on this sort of idea of activating your funny and ask Erika a question. Which is that I think maybe for a lot of us, at least I was like drawn to come to this room today because I thought, wow, I remember like a long time ago being kind of funny or relatable, and now my work is so heavy that I feel like I like repel my closest friends and neighbors who don't want to ask me how my day was because I might say plague or something else like horrific. And the thing that I'd like to come away from this thinking about, this like intersection of social justice and comedy, is how do we not lose ourselves in our work, but be relatable. Like sometimes I think the closest that my friends and family get to Madagascar is that moment that they ask me about my last trip or my work. And I feel so afraid of trying to make light of it, and it also doesn't feel light. I don't feel light and funny anymore. And it's just kind of like an interesting thing to me to think about. Is there a way to find your way back to that? So even as we lead our organizations and live our personal lives, we're like still able to bring that home.
Yeah,
do you have advice?
Comedy is self-care in addition to, you know, all of the benefits of using it to do your work. You know, before we did the project, What Could Go Wrong, focused on open carry in the United States, the organization's life was in following shootings and working with gun violence survivors and, taking on the NRA. All of this stuff was super hard. And I also didn't feel like I was doing the light in my work. But I think the point about comedy being an avenue to hope and optimism is that if you're doing all of the things that social justice, NGO, that part of the work, you have to do the serious stuff. You have to advocate. You have to do the research. You have to engage people in those serious ways. But that if you can find a comedic way in, it's the catch point. And so finding a way to be funny about a serious topic, like way too many people dying of gun violence in our country, was a way to also, go and socialize with friends. And I'll be like, oh, but you got to check out this. We're experimenting with comedy or the arts or bringing together other cultural institutions to talk about the issue in a way that isn't just how many people are being killed every day in our country, which is heavy.
Can I offer 2 quick tactical things? I swear I'll be really short. So Ai-Jin-Poo, how she's using comedy, she's working with Second City, and Second City is doing a comedy improv training with domestic workers who are actually the ones who are telling their stories, which actually create policy change. So it's a way of, because they realize doing the work that they're, we all have funny stories. Humans are funny. Dealing with messy humans is funny. So they wanted to harness the funny stories that they had to tell and also provide a bit of extra training as they tell their advocacy stories. So that's like a direct example. And the other one that's really interesting, there's a group called Define American. It's actually part of our lab. Define American deals with humanizing immigration issues and stories in the United States. And something that they do, I think, is fascinating. So they work with Hollywood and advise on shows to like if you're going to tell a story about an immigrant, here's what you should do, or somebody who's undocumented. And so the woman who runs cultural strategy there, Elizabeth Voorhees, said, even when we go into the room to advise on a serious show, like Grey's Anatomy or something, we bring comedy people with us. We bring often undocumented comedians, because we find that if we don't do that, automatically in the room, we're all sad, and we can't get people back from that. We can't get TV writers back from it, even when they're doing a series. So it just opens up this space for humanity that's like, we're all a little bit funny because we're human.
Get everybody in the room, basically.
Yeah, and you're not like, anyway.
Okay, so we had a question just here, and then one at the back as well. So you've been waiting a little while, so.
Thank you. Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
My name is LJ Silverman, and I head up Social Entrepreneurship at the London School of Economics. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation. I think as a Brit, we can actually learn quite a bit from the Americans on this. What I've noted through the whole Brexit debacle is that comedy has been used quite a bit. So on the People's March the other week, there were loads of placards, Alexa cancel Brexit, where Brits run a march, things must be bad, those kind of things. And but I think from what I've experienced and from speaking with friends, it is very much an echo chamber in Britain at the moment. And when I talk to the few friends that did vote Brexit, they haven't seen the funny placards, and they haven't been watching Have I Got News for You. And I do feel that for us, yes, it's a comfort blanket. It's getting through what is a pretty awful divorce at the moment. But I somehow feel there must be a way of getting across. And I know that satire, as you said, doesn't work. But on a practical level, how can we engage more? Because I feel that it's dividing. Comedy can be more divisive at the moment, especially in the UK, than kind of productive and encouraging and accelerating social change. So on a kind of day-to-day level, on a practical level, on the digital platforms, what do you think we can be doing to get the message across and to change minds rather than just to polarize even more?
Omri, do you want to have an answer? This is just to look at the time as well. So.
Wow. Okay, so
one more question after this.
I haven't found a way to reach out to the other aisle with comedy, and kind of like, I'm honest here. I never really found a way to convince people by using comedy, but I found it very powerful to engage a chance for hope by kind of like my own peer of friends, otherwise we would be completely depressed. Since we have only 1 minute and a half and it's kind of like the end, I want to tell you, but I think there is a story that might be helpful here. Back in the early 60s, Karl Reiner, the legendary writer Karl Reiner, was sitting in his office, and actually maybe a good answer for your question about how to become funny and what funny is. So Karl Reiner, the best writer I know, is now 90-something, was sitting in his office on the 40th floor at NBC. And he was writing the Dick Van Dyke Show, the most popular comedy show at the time. And the 25-year-old executive from the network came over to his office and put his foot on his Karl Reiner's desk and told him, let me tell you what is funny. And gave Karl Reiner a 10-minute conversation about a talk about what funny is. After 10 minutes, Karl Reiner was like, have you done? And the executive was like, yeah. So Karl Reiner took the shoe off this executive leg and threw it out of the window and said, this is funny. So you can't really explain how to do that, but I guess that would be, you just need to show it. Like we have a saying in Israel that pornography is a matter of geography. Comedy is also a matter of cultural elements and stuff, but basically on the bottom line, it's all getting into understanding what makes people laugh, and it's trying to work with that.
Absolutely. We have one more question. Thank you.
Bankar Roy from India. This is my 15th year in this forum. And I was just wondering why we have 80% of the speakers who are so deadly dull. Why is it we don't have many more people who speak about humor, about comedy, and make the very serious issues a bit more lighter?
We need more funding.
Sorry?
And then there will be more.
Do you mean funding, like funding?
Yeah.
Here all night.
But I just want to say that since I've been working in India for the last few months, I became a big fan of Indian comedy. I know it's weird. It's not very...
So why can't we have a session next year on comedians and people who have humor from the South?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's addressed to Jude right there, sitting in front.
Sounds good.
You got it, Jude?
Jude's doing it, writing it down. Well,
can we have many, many more sessions like this, because it's very important. This is the first session I've had. I don't know if this is the first session you've ever had in the last 15 years, Jude? On humor, on comedy. And I think
one in 2015. Perhaps I was forgettable in 2015. You may not remember that I said similar things, but now just with more words.
That we have many more sessions like this next year.
More culture change, more cultural elements.
Well, this is an opportunity to say when you vote, you should check off
more of it. So shall we have a hands up? Who would like more sessions like this in the future at Skoll? Yes. Who would like to have more comedy conversations happening in your workplace? Who is now willing to go back and work with comedians, comedy writers, to start the conversation in your organisations? Yes?
Do you want the Laughter Lab in your region?
Yes.
Because we're trying to get funding for that.
So it's about, really just to wrap up, it's about literally embracing what the possibilities can do, the art of persuasion using comedy. That's what it's all about. I was going to get you guys to all finish with a quick joke, but you know, I haven't prepared you, so we'll just have to leave it at that. What did the 0 say to the 8? Nice belt. I say that all the time. Sorry, guys. Okay, it's been wonderful having you guys here for this incredible session. And could you please thank our incredible speakers, Caty, Omri, and Erika. Thank you very much to all of you.